Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Carol Glasser, and I am past chair of the Animals and Society section of the American Sociological Association. Our section, along with the Animals and Society Institute, work together to put on this colloquium series, the Animals and Society Colloquium series. During the academic year, we seek to have one talk a month that addresses human-animal studies. It's interdisciplinary. Um, if any of you are interested in ever having a talk in this series, you can always reach out to myself or Gayla, who you're going to meet in a minute from ASI. And we're always happy to hear and take proposals from people who might want to speak in the series. So if you are a sociologist and you are a member of ASA and you're not in the Animals and Society section, please reach out to me. But anyone and everyone who is here would probably be interested in being more involved with the Animals and Society Institute, ASI. So I'm going to hand things over to Gayla Argent to tell you a little bit about ASI and introduce our speakers so we can get things started.
Thank you, Carol. I'm Gayla Argent, and I am the Human Animal Studies Program Director at the Animals and Society Institute, and where my charge is to forward the field of human animal studies, and this series is a part of doing that. A little bit about ASI and what we do and resources that might be useful to you. So the Animals and Society Institute is a human-animal relationship think tank dedicated to improving the lives of animals and people through research and analysis that leads to more humane and compassionate communities. In terms of research, we manage two academic journals, Society and Animals and the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science. We also manage a human animal studies book series through Brill. Our website has lots of resources, which we've produced for scholars, faculty, students, and mental health professionals. Our communications director, Lisa Burnell, is going to put links up for those things. We have a new database of listings for degrees and programs that we've just reworked. And one of my other charges here is I produce a monthly human animal studies report. You can sign up. It's a listserv where I cover the month's news, funding opportunities, webinars, calls for papers, new books, new articles, and try and get all of that information pulled together every month for you. So it's my delight to introduce today's speaker. I'm gonna start off with formal and go a little informal here. Dr. Sandra Swart is professor and chair of the Department of History, Stellenbosch. Did I pronounce that correctly? University in South Africa. She received her PhD in modern history from Oxford in 2001, while simultaneously obtaining a Master's of Science in Environmental Change and Management, also at Oxford. No small feat. She studies socio-environmental history of Southern Africa, focusing on animals. And she is involved in quite a few publishing endeavors, not only as a writer, but as an editor. But I want to tell you, when I became aware of Sandra's work, I was wrapping up my PhD at University of Leicester in archaeology, and someone from the faculty ran into the office where I was sitting and said, "Gayla, you've got to see this," and handed me this article, "The World the Horses Made, a South African case study of writing animals into social history." Well, not only was I tickled because I was trying to write animals into archaeology and nobody was doing that, but here's a horse person too, which I am, and what I was trying to write into archaeology. So I was very happy to come across Sandra at that point. We later became Facebook friends. I found out that she had Appaloosa horses, which I have. So we have communicated, and I wanted to share with you also that the book that she sent me that I have that is signed, Riding High Humans, Horses, Humans in History in South Africa. For you horse people who are here, you need this book. Uh, So I'm delighted. I'm tickled to have Sandra here. She is a lovely person. She's an exceptional scholar and a groundbreaking one. And one thing that we can't say about all of the academic scholars out there is that she is a lovely writer too.
Oh,
So you need this book.
jeepers. Okay. Thank you so much. This is such a warm welcome. I've known you a long time. You continue to inspire me. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that this gang exists. I don't take any of this for granted. I'm very happy to be here. It's always such a pleasure to be able to talk about my work, but it hasn't always been like that. As you know, I'm a historian of the more than human, of animal sensitive history, of the kind of multi-species past. And I've been doing it, as you say, for 20 years, from back when it was wildly unpopular and in fact career damaging, to now when I think, it isn't. And how wonderful, but I will never take it lightly. And this remains for me an honor and a delight to do this kind of work. So here we are together. I've got coffee, we've got this gang, and I'm very grateful. But I also have a new book out. And, that makes me completely unbearable because people with a new book out, and this is true, can't talk about anything else. So you'll just have to forgive me. We're like teenage boys with their first car. We can't help ourselves. What we want to do is talk about our books. And now you've opened the door and I'm not going to be able to stop myself. So just moderate me for time. The book I'm going to talk about today, well, first let me just show, you very sweetly told about my other books. And of course, if there are horse humans out there who wish to join our herd, I will send you a PDF of the book. Just send me an email. Shh, don't tell the publisher. But the book I want to talk about today is this book. And, Toni Morrison once said, if there's a book you really want to read, but it doesn't exist, then you must write it. And so I grumpily tried to postpone it for 20 years, but eventually I just wrote it. And here it is. And I'm happy to say that Ohio University Press has picked it up, so it'll be in North America next year. We'll see what happens with the UK and Europe. But if you are desperate to talk to me about a part of it, I'll see what I can do about sharing it with you. My new book project, I should just flag as well, is going to be out with Johns Hopkins at some point. And it's going to be about the long and tangled history of humans and baboons over many millennia. And it's probably going to be called Baboon, A Human History. I wanted to call it Baboon, A Love Story, but the publisher feared it would draw the wrong crowd. So let's see where we are. Let's see what we can do today. Perhaps I'll start by talking about the title, The Lion's Historian. It comes from a proverb in my part of the world. Until the lion has a historian of his own, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Well, I too have hunted lions, not with spears or rifles, but with radio telemetry and high-powered military-grade binoculars. Pre-dawn and post-coffee, we used to head to this tiny airstrip by Wangi National Park in Zimbabwe. And we'd chase baboons off the hangar and shake baboon poop off the cover of the aeroplane. And then we'd bundle up under layers to keep warm. And we'd climb into this tiny little microlight, tiny little plane. It was flown with much daring and panache, but little experience. And what we would do as the sky turned the color of indigo ink, as it does just before dawn in Zimbabwe, we would put on these crackling headsets and listen for the elusive ping of the lion's satellite collar as we flew above Miombo woodland, the veldt of the savannah. And this was 20 years ago. when the world was a very different place. And I was finishing, as you said, my master's and my PhD in history, my MSc in environmental change. And that's kind of a crazy place, a crazy thing to do, but Oxford was this crazy place. And I thought that studying ecology with history would make me a better animal sensitive historian. And really what it did do was introduce me to a world of apex predators, both in academia and in the wilds. But okay, back to the little microlight in Zimbabwe. We would follow the lions from the sky, but as dusk fell, we would deploy these night vision binoculars and then track the lions deep into Miombo woodland. And sometimes the tawny beasts were lured closer to the 4x4 vehicle with a looped soundtrack that we had made. It was the sound of squealing pigs, like in a schlock horror movie. I'll never forget the terrible screaming of the pigs, but the lions loved it. Now, it's important to say that I did not do much. My daring partner flew the plane, calibrated the drug dosage, lined up the shot, and always got the lion. I was in charge of the clipboard and the sandwiches. But in so doing, I'm delighted to say that I broke the tradition of the glorious hunter who lives to tell the tale of the hunt, because I was distinctly inglorious. Mind you, those sandwiches became pretty damn significant in the long hours waiting for the lions to wake up. The drug of choice was Special K, ketamine, which left the darted animals in an immobile state, powerless to move, but awake. And I'll never forget the glowing golden eyes staring into mine, as though imprinting a memory of me to follow up with if they ever encountered me later. And it took me back, it took my kind of hindbrain back to an atavistic time, a time of leonine ascendancy, when lions were king of our puny primate ancestors. Only later did I come to realize the true extent of the human lion's struggle over land, lifeways, and livestock in today's Africa. That field work that I helped with, that I carried the clipboard for 20 years ago, with its aerial surveillance, satellite collars, that's the high end, the expensive end of conservation. But what I'll offer you today is another beast altogether, something of a completely different taxonomic order. And what we're going to do today is track the wild beast into the archive, into oral histories, into the cosmologies and cultures of indigenous people, and then into the dangerous thickets of historiography. You'll remember the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein saying, if a lion could speak, we couldn't understand him. What I'm going today is to argue that lions can speak, they do speak, and that human beings have long tried to understand them and sometimes succeeded. I'm also going to say that lions have tried to understand us too. So let me tell you about it. I think this is a new frontier in history writing, which is the point of this book. It's a history that says, as many of us do work on, it's a history that challenges the convention that history is solely human. It challenges us to say, you know, that in our current cataclysmic biodiversity crisis, we need history. We needed to find new ways to live with other creatures, and a possibility of our shared future probably pivots on this reckoning with our shared pasts. But I've long thought that the art of being a historian is knowing exactly how far to go and then going just a little bit further. So I also want to make the argument that animals have cultures, that some of these are co-created with us, and that they matter, that they should be taken seriously in the stories we tell of them and the policies we make for and about them. Because this is what we might call useful history or usable past. I want to really show how human animal history or animal sensitive history can help us understand our place in the world better, but also perhaps make our world a better place. All right, well, Humans have long glorified lions. Let me take you back 40,000 years to the last ice age with the Löwenmensch, a lion-headed humanoid figure carved from mammoth tusk. Was it a representative of a god, a lion, a shaman? We don't know. But closer to home in my part of Africa, Southern Africa, South Africa, we do also have a different kind of archive, this indigenous rock art, rock painting, which shows us lion human beings. Sometimes the lions have human characteristics, and scholars have traced this kind of enduring linking of lions with power. If I were to ask you, if you think of a lion, what pops into your head? What's the immediate thought? What does your gut tell you? What's your visceral reaction to the very word lion? Well, historically, we think of the lions of Gilgamesh, ancient Assyria, the Lion of Judah. But we also think of our own era's leonine associations with nobility. And that's really the common theme. There's so much cross-cultural evidence that they were used to represent the elite. In Ankole, in modern-day Uganda, when the king died, he really changed into a lion. It wasn't a metaphor for them. But speaking of metaphors, countless sports teams are called after big cats to emphasize what? Their power, their prowess, sometimes their masculinity. Think also about the British Empire, that imperial lion, in which the regal beast came to represent the British Empire itself. So mastering on a local level, on a geopolitical level, or on an individual, often masculine level, the lion, by taming or hunting or killing, or perhaps becoming a lion, has been part of many cultures. But for a long time, lions hunted us. They were once the most widespread mammals across the world. We can trace our relationship back several million years. Let me take you back to modern-day Tanzania, 3 million years ago, when Australopithecus afarensis, one of our earlier ancestors, meandered through wet volcanic cinders, leaving footprints that were subsequently covered by layers of ash. They left an archive of footprints preserved forever. But when we uncovered those footprints, we saw we were not alone. Stalking the savannah was a proto-lion. Also, during the early Pleistocene, lions became increasingly widespread following the global shift, climate-wise, from forest to grassland. And like us, they meandered out of Africa, probably about 100,000 years ago, into Europe and Asia, and then down through the Americas across the ice bridges. We homo sapiens and lions have a lot in common. At different times, we were kings of the earth. We both evolved in Africa. We spread out across the globe. We are rivals in having the honor of being the most widely spread mammal across the world at different times. We both care for our elders. We care for the frail. And we both hum when we're very happy. But as our histories became more entangled over time, there were consequences. In fact, the subsequent decline in the lion's global range was probably caused by us, coupled with climate change. Today, there are about 20 to 30,000 wild lions in Africa, and perhaps 700 Indian lions in the western forests. But lions pop up in the most unexpected places. Here was one from 1969, swinging London. He used to be visited by the Rolling Stones, go to parties in an open-top sports car. And today, in cities from Baghdad to Moscow, from Peshawar to Pretoria, people are keeping lions as pets. In fact, if you're thinking of relocating, there are 6 American states where you don't even need a permit to keep a lion. Saddam Hussein's son used to keep an old declawed lion to whom he said he fed his rivals in love. In Mexico City, drug dealers keep lions as status symbols. So we humans need these big predators, ecologically, sure, but also psychologically. In Europe, much of North America and Asia, the public is deeply alienated from these animals. There's a dangerously romantic and anthropomorphic idea of what lions are. There was a brief craze in Asia for blue jeans, inevitably nicknamed zoo genes, that are chewed and clawed by big cats before you buy them, which led a kind of new ferocity to the catwalk. But there's another way to connect viscerally with lions, and that, alas, is the lion bone trade. Blood lions are farmed, wild lions are poached. For this trade to feed the trade, bones, teeth, claws are fashioned into amulets to bring strength and sexual potency, to people, which is a tragic perversion of the lion's historic power. But making sense of the power of lions has been part of our coevolution as a species, as Homo sapiens. And one of humanity's sagas tells of Achilles, the legendary hero of the Trojan War. 3,000 years later, we're still talking about him, this mythic warrior, this hunky military man. He was invincible, and I'll remind you of the story. He was invincible, he was totally invulnerable on all parts of his body because his mother had dipped him into the river Styx. But she had to hold him by something, so she held him by his heel. So the heel was his one point of frailty, his one little weakness. But he was still, of course, this invincible warrior. And when his greatest enemy begged him to make peace, Achilles thrust his spear into the ground and he roared, "There can be no binding oath between lions and men." But I'm here to tell you that Achilles was wrong. In fact, there are ancient covenants between lions and men. And this, I think, is the enduring Achilles heel in human animal studies. We so often move from the premise that no pact is possible, that the only possibilities are either conflict or domination, or perhaps obliteration, as though there are no other ways to live and to be with each other. But my book, the whole point of the book was there to show otherwise, to show that history teaches us that there have been truces, there have been pacts, there have been covenants between lions and men. There are other multi-species assemblages, other ways to be, other ways to live together. So let me tell you the story. In the 1950s, Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, an American anthropologist on the Peabody-Harvard Southwest Africa expedition, witnessed a curious relationship between the big cats and the Zutwazi indigenous hunter-gatherer group in the Kalahari Desert. Now, being new to Africa, she thought it was totally normal, but it was very far from that. Bit of background, lions loom very large in many indigenous hunter-gatherer cosmologies and cultures. Among the Zutwazi, it was no other. Lions were important. The talk of the shamans, of the healers, they would say that the healers would undergo a shaking and a shuddering, that lion hair would grow from their bodies, that whiskers would sprout, that claws would come, teeth would grow long, and people could shape-shift between species and become powerful sorcerers. But even ordinary men could slip the skin of a human and travel by night in the body of a lion. It was said that if you dart a lion and he doesn't die, that lion is probably a human traveling in the body of a lion as a sorcerer, come to practice the dark arts. But quite aside from these otherworldly or cosmological perils, lions are a very real and serious threat in the long grass. But not for everyone, not for everyone. So let's look at the Zutwazi. Let's find out what was going there. What was the thing that didn't astonish Elizabeth Marshall Thomas and did astonish the rest of us? This place is where the Zutwazi live, it's Naina, and the Zutwazi means true people, real people. And they occupy this place. It's on the border between Namibia and Botswana. And it's a place they call the place of broken rocks. It's arid, it's dry, it's bristling with predators. Yet curiously, the men and women of Nainai take no particular precaution against lions. They don't fear attack. They just move with their eyes open. And as hunter-gatherers, they're already hyper-aware of the ecology around them. And if they did stumble upon a lion, they would unhurriedly and calmly move away at an oblique angle. And very interestingly, this was the method also adopted by lions, this unhurried, unrushed departure at an oblique angle was exactly what lions did if they stumble on a big human group too. But what happens at night, at most dangerous of times? Well, the Zutwazi just sleep on the ground. They did at that time. They were peripatetic. They moved around. They were transhuman hunter-gatherers, so they didn't stay in one place. It wasn't worth it to build, structures or fences. So they slept on the ground and they had a fire going. That's all they had. So if a lion did show up, if a lion crept close to the fire, what the humans would do is leap to their feet, brandish glowing branches above themselves to make themselves appear taller, and then command the lions, leave at once. And strangely, the lions often did. So it's not that the lions weren't looming large in their cosmology. Of course they were. In fact, they often likened them to the spirits of the dead. And they performatively challenged both the lions and the spirits of the dead at night. It was, what they would do is they would leave the safety of the fire and run out into the darkness. And then, the lone individual challenging the most dangerous things out there, spirits of the dead, and the big apex predators. It was a kind of Saturnalia, a world turned upside down. But the world was turned upside down in other ways also. And what I think was most remarkable was that the Zutwazi would even steal from a lion's kill. So when people were out foraging, they would follow the vultures, and lions do this too. They follow the vultures to see where there's a recent kill, wherever there's a free lunch. And in 1953, and this wasn't following the vultures, but you'll see what happened. In 1953, a group of hunters shot a wildebeest, one of the big herbivores. And they darted her and they were following her when they realized they weren't alone. As they tracked her down, they saw 30 hungry lionesses with her. And because it takes a while for the dart to work, for her to drop. And by that stage, the lionesses had found her. Taking all this in, the humans walked up to the nearest lioness and they threw clods of soil to explode harmlessly and not disrespectfully in front of the lioness without touching her. Sand did not touch. And they said firmly but politely, "Old ones, this meat is ours." And what happened? The lions twitched their tails, they glowered, they paced up and down, but the men remained motionless and tall. And finally, astonishingly, the whole pride of lions retreated. No human died that day, no lion died that day, only the wildebeest. But raiding from lions had rules. The pact, the truce, the covenant had to be maintained. Humans taking a lion's kill had to leave a portion of the body, the head and the upper spine. So, and human hunters really had to leave actually a portion of their own kill as well. So Achilles would have had to eat his words. A human generation later in the 1980s, they did a study, a fascinating study, and they looked at the period of a century and they analyzed the data they had, which was for 1,500 deaths among the Zutwazi. And only 2 of those had come from lions. Whereas in stark contrast, in an area a little bit adjacent to it, with a different group of people and a different group of lions, lions opportunistically hunt and kill people all the time. So what then is the secret of this covenant? What then is the secret of the truce? And I think the first thing is the experience of mutual understanding and mutual respect, or at least an understanding of mutual signs, of a rough and ready body language they could follow. And the second thing is being able to coexist in the same territory. The humans roamed the land by day and the lions by night. And of course, we all know we're a diurnal species by and large, but we're normally more active in the day. But in this place, unlike in other communities, in Nainai, no one went out at night. They respected that that was the lion's land. And also in most places, lions do predominantly hunt at night, but there's no problem with their hunting during the day. As long as the grass cover is high enough, here it was. But you would not find a lion out hunting during the day in Nainai. So they were able to work it out by humans taking the day shift, lions taking the night shift. This was not true in neighboring Etosha, for example, where the local people had been forced out of the area because of fortress conservation, the building of Etosha Game Reserve. And when the fences were imposed and the people were forcibly removed, the lions forgot the culture. The people forgot the culture. Other than a few game rangers and a few tourists and cars in the early days, lions didn't see people. That co-created culture of coexistence dissipated. And the result was that the Etosha lions were absolutely deadly, while being genetically exactly the same as these lions. But of course, lethal lions and individual and whole groups are known to us historically. And now let's turn our attention to Tanzania, home to the world's largest lion population. Now, just some statistics. Over 1,000 people have been attacked by lions between, these are some good stats, between 1990 and 2007, over 1,000 lion attacks. And man-eating in some areas is actually on the increase. Can be 100 people a year are attacked. And prides seem to develop local cultures of eating. Just like humans develop local cultures of eating, I can't imagine someone from the Mediterranean being more horrified than seeing an English breakfast, being confronted by that, absolute attack on their culture. And we're beginning to take all of this quite seriously. And I think as historians, we do need to do that. We need to get to the bottom of this and start reconstructing how these cultures looked. Because we're beginning to see that animals, of course, don't just possess instinct, but agency, not nature, but culture. And the most notorious human-eating roads, you probably know about them already, because the man who hunted them hunted fame just as assiduously as he hunted lions. Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson offers us the quintessential story of the glorious hunter, with which we opened the proverb with which we opened the talk, because he popularized the series of books basically about how fabulous he was as a heroic hunter of dangerous beasts around the world. But what happened with these two males, they really were dangerous. They're two curiously maneless males, and they were preying on the Indian laborers, the indentured laborers who were helping to build a railway from Mombasa to Uganda. And in 1898, the Kenyan government, the Kenya to Ugandan Railway, it was called, the British government, the imperial beast, had to bring someone in because so many of the laborers were being killed. It was holding back infrastructural construction. And here's the terrible part. The railway was being built on a far older road, a terrible road, an ancient Swahili trade route along which enslaved people were trafficked from the hinterland to the coast. And these sickening caravans of death saw many people die. And it's likely that the lions learned a culture of preying on the dead and the enfeebled and those who were left behind. Patterson, glorious hunter archetype, was employed to protect the British Empire's interests, and he was there to protect the railway, which is this vital move in the great game between the European powers. But the British imperial power was completely derailed by these two impudent local lions. And 1898, these interesting, there were other lions doing it as well, but these two stuck out because they were maneless males. And they ignored animal bait. They were very hard to hunt. And Patterson made a big thing about it, and he contrasted his own courage in his book with the cowardice he perceived in the local people and the Indian laborers who were working on railways. But actually, Indian laborers mounted a pretty successful mutiny against him at the time because of his inability to stop the lions. And they had begun to realize that the British imperial lion was not all powerful. And he quickly dispatched the first one. It took ages to kill the second one, but he did it. And after that, he boasted that the workers had heralded him as a savior. And this is quite important for us to unpack. We need to unpack the ideology at work here, because he was maintaining Britain's reputation. The empire, and this really underlines for us as historians how the hunt was a visible spectacle in the performance of power. On an individual level, sure, for him, but also on a geopolitical level. But it was a very complex performance. It wasn't just a crude demonstration of superior might. It was also a demonstration of superior right, the right to be there, because of the killing of this dangerous predator, which was symbolic as an expression of sovereignty. So emphasizing this protective, paternal component of the hunt, and therefore imperialism itself, the colonial subject, of course, being protected both from their nature, but also from their own natures, as we saw with his narrative. So we as historians need to address the absence not only of the lion's roar, as I've said, but also of the voices of the subaltern hunter, the indigenous person who is there, also in this complicated multi-species assemblage. Today, I think this will interest you, these two Tsavo man-eaters live in America, and they're in the Field Museum in Chicago. And they've been hailed lately as resistance fighters because they were the ones who first disrupted the construction of the empire's infrastructure. So there's been calls from Kenya to repatriate them, to bring the bodies of these two heroes home. Now, of course, there have been other man-eaters. This one is Osama, for the other terror-inspiring being who was working at the time. And this lion, Osama, was killed in about 2004, and everyone thought, oh, he must have been injured in some way, and perhaps he was sick, perhaps he had a broken tooth, perhaps he was covered in porcupine quills that had festered. No, not a bit of it. Just like the Tsavo man-eaters, he was a male in prime health. In fact, the scientists working on the case suggest it was probably his mother who taught him to embrace this culture, to prefer the taste of human flesh. So these lions turn to humans for preference because of a local culture, but also because of their own history that infused and inflected this culture. We don't know enough because for so long, the focus has been on the hunter and not the lion. But the big cats highlight the complexity of power. You know, rogue animals can be a proxy also for the oppressed. 1964, an elderly Zitwazi medicine man observed darkly that the great healers were the ones who went hunting as lions, searching for people to kill. And in other places, particularly in Mozambique, and higher up in Africa, happy to talk about that also, there are certainly those who adopted the physical embodiment of a predator to oppose a predatory colonial state. But hunting lion has also been synonymous with hunting status, with hunting male, particularly, identity. And it's been very important in this rite of passage. And of course, here we think immediately of the Maasai on the East Coast, and with the rite of passage for the young warriors killing a lion. And it's developed over time. And I don't know if anyone listening is planning on having a child soon and has a strong preference for a boy or a girl. But if you do, we can learn from people here. If you want to get a boy, you get some lion fat and you have a full tablespoon. But if you want a girl, you have half a tablespoon of lion fat. There's a parallel I want to talk about for another kind of coming of age, another rite of passage. It wouldn't have been articulated in the same way, but the parallels, I think you agree, are there. And these are these young bloods, these young patricians. And the killing of the lion for them was shaped by class. Gender and race, of course, also. But we mustn't forget the class. And sometimes I do think we forget class too much. in environmental history, that gender and race were pivotal, but class was there too. And killing a lion was part of their colonial rights as a kind of natural extension of the Scottish hunting lodge. And here the hunt was first enacted not in Africa's Eden, but on the playing fields of Eton. And this ancient desire, this ancient need to become a man through killing an animal just cries out for analysis, and it occupies my thoughts. But the trope of the mythic hunter, that glorious hunter, is exactly what I wanted to understand in the book, and then disrupt as much as we can. But first we have to understand it. And now to move a little bit to drawing some conclusions. You've learned a lot about my own inglorious past, but there's several lessons we should take from lions. Our relationship has been complex. It's been complicated. It's much more complex and complicated than just domination, killing, hunting, taming, or conflict. Knowing that animals have cultures and that these can change over time fundamentally alters, I really think it changes forever, how we write about the past and how we think about the future. Now that we have seen that not only have animals have agency, which most of us have accepted, but also culture, not just nature. And I think we really need to spell it out, that animals and humans can co-create these shared interspecies cultures of accommodation. We can then factor them into the histories we write about the past, but also into the conservation policies or ways of being that we can enact today. And I think that we historians are then useful. We can offer this deeper understanding of the diverse ways of being and living and understanding other species, and take into account the shifting culture, both of animals and humans. And I think this is the power of animal-sensitive history, or more than human histories. So if you needed a sentence if somebody asks you how you spent this hour and you need to tell a man in a bar what you learned, I think this would be what you could say. I think you could say it's this: animals have cultures that can change over time, and that some of these are co-created with other species, including our species, and that this cultural understanding can go both ways. Each species is aware of the other, watching, killing, escaping, accommodating, challenging. And I think we could call this a kind of co-creation of a culture of coexistence. Now, of course, at this stage, the man at the bar might have meandered away hurriedly, but if he hasn't, carry on telling him that this is on a spectrum or a continuum between open war or uneasy but peaceful coexistence. And what we're really learning is that these complicated animals have found ways of being with us, and we have found ways of being with them. And I just want to quickly, because I can see that I must wrap it up, but allow me to just say a couple more things. And that is that we must be very careful not to romanticize the animal other. We really have to understand them as complicated as we are ourselves. In this urbanizing world, we are so alienated from the existence of others. We have to understand this is an apex, seriously dangerous predator, and Disneyfying them, making them a cartoon version of themselves, does no service. It does a grave injustice to the African communities living with these and accommodating these dangerous animals, but it also does a grave disservice. Also, the Indian communities living with these dangerous predators does them a grave disservice. But it also does a disservice to the animal itself. It flattens them. It makes them cartoon caricatures of otherwise very complicated and interesting creatures who are creatures of history, just as we are ourselves. So we mustn't romanticize the animal other. Our job is to historicize them. And really, in final conclusion, I think these are some important points to take away. I want us to say that human-wildlife relationships are not just of secondary significance. We matter sometimes in the co-creation of how they live their lives and how they are in the world. Secondly, that their behaviors are not set in stone. A lion is not a lion is not a lion. Biology is not destiny, not even for lions. And thirdly, we have to remember that wild animals don't always favor pristine human-free habitats. No, not at all. That in many cases, they can live closely with us. So let's wrap it up. The last thing I want to say is that the stories we share as the Lions historian really, really do matter. Facts alone are not enough. So often we think that just lists of scary facts are going to change behavior. They don't. We now know from studies of neuroscience that the reaction the body has to a list of data, a list of frightening facts about biodiversity loss, is very different to the stories and narratives that we can tell. Those stories do two things. They stay in your mind longer so that you will be different for a longer, you will react differently when you need to make a quick policy decision or you need to understand news of the world. But quite literally, it changes how your body reacts to information. It goes into a deeper part of your memory, but it also makes you, when it releases oxytocin, which makes you, however briefly, a better citizen on planet Earth, more open, more empathetic, and more ready to live and to be with other species. So in closing, I want to say we need more than human solutions for living on planet Earth. The seeds of these solutions may lie buried in the soil of the past, and that history offers us a tenuous, tentative hope. And if our stories, if the Lions historian stories can change how we feel, then they can also change how we act. Because we humans are storytelling creatures, and it is stories that'll save the Earth. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this.
Thank you so much for that beautiful talk and everything that you had to say. It's a lot to think about, and you're a pleasure to listen to as well.
Thank you, Carol. That was very sweet. Thanks.
We have a couple questions. We only have 10 minutes for Q&A, so we'll jump right into it. We already have some in the chat. The first one is the more complex one.
Yeah.
So, well, let's start with a more simple one that you can answer super fast.
Excellent.
What time frame do you focus on in your book, The Lion Historian?
Oh, I go back millennia because I want to show how some of our relationships have been shaped. I think, for example, of our synanthropic friends like the baboons who live very, very closely with us, how to explain this other than a kind of close co-evolutionary past. So I'm really pushing us into deep history, which I think is important to do, and into the pre-colonial past, because I think this has been one of our flaws, that we really do need to take the pre-colonial past seriously as well and go much further back. Thanks for that question.
And then Tobias has their hand raised, so I'll turn it over to you, Tobias.
Hey, yeah, thank you, Sandra. What an amazing talk. So my question is, do you have examples of this multi-species culture making that's going on now, and forms of détente or navigating coexistence between lions and people? And the example that came to mind for me was safari. And, you know, when you go out on safari, you're getting very close to these large predators, but they seem to kind of recognize that, you know, people on safari are not prey. And my guides have told me, well, it's because you're in the vehicle, and they recognize the vehicle as being separate. But I also wonder if, you know, there's evidence that in some way, they kind of recognize that, like, the safari industry is in some cases the condition of possibility for their own habitat protection. And if there might be, if this might be an example of a new kind of treaty that's being negotiated, or if there are other examples of new treaties that are being negotiated in our 21st century. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tobias. Yes, of course. I mean, of course, they don't have the cognitive understanding that without the safari industry, you know, habitat encroachment would happen and their numbers would be completely decimated, very, very rapidly. And that's true of the trophy hunting industry too, in fact. So no, I don't, obviously they can't have that kind of perspective on it. What they can have is learning very quickly and very differently in different areas how dangerous people are. So, in some areas, they've learned that people are extremely dangerous and need to be avoided. In other places, they've learned over generations that people aren't dangerous. They can't be got. But if you avoid them, if you avoid attacking them, you can coexist with them very, very closely. But Tobias, if I were to try and give like a sort of a raw footage of culture developing super fast, I wouldn't use the best example as lions. What I would do is actually look at elephants. I would prefer to do that because there's some fantastic, well, I could look at baboons as well, where there are 2 towns in the Western Cape where some humans and baboons have reached a mutual accommodation by doing things differently. The humans are covering up their waste products, and the baboons have learned to avoid human areas. Otherwise, they get firecrackers thrown at them, or they get paintball sent at them. In a town that's not very far away from them, the baboons and the people are not coping. The people have not modified their culture to keep trash away from baboons, and the baboons have just not modified to stay away from people. And this is now reaching a tipping point where people are turning to actual real violence, shooting with real guns and pellet guns, even putting out poison for baboons. So that's happening in real time. Just in the interest of time, I won't give you the elephant example because I see there are other hands, but I'm happy to chat with you about that another time.
We have one question in the chat that we'll hopefully get to, but let's do.
See my friend Gary. Yes.
Let's Lindsay's had her hand up, so why don't we do Lindsay and then Gary?
Oh, Lindsay. Yeah.
Hi, Sandra. How are you?
Oh gosh, how lovely to see you. Yeah.
Oh, lovely to hear your voice. Wonderful talk. I'm so excited to read this book. I have been focusing on horses in North America, and particularly the way that our settler colonial frameworks shape how we view them in history, which has very little to do with the horses themselves. Oftentimes they're foils for Indigenous people in the source work and things like that. And I was really intrigued by what you mentioned about the use of hunting the man-eaters of Tsavo as an assertion of not just imperial might, but legitimacy.
Yes.
And I was wondering, I've been thinking about that a lot because that happens a lot on the Southwest borderlands where, for instance, the United States invades Mexico, which we now call Texas. And part of their argument is kind of like that argument, like the Comanches are so dangerous. We need to rule you. Mexico doesn't deserve it anymore because they can't protect you, but we can. And then it turns out, no, the US can't protect people either. But I'm wondering how thinking about animal cultures helps us kind of break through that settler colonial framework. And I'm wondering, especially since the way I see horses being used in this way and they're prey animals and kind of.
Oh, no, don't breathe.
Oh, we lost Lindsay.
We will never lose Lindsay.
Do you have anything to say about the comments?
I do. Lindsay, we missed the last 5 seconds of what you said.
I'm sorry. I'm
That's
just
okay.
wondering how the imperial gaze on the predator is different than the imperial gaze I see here in North America on the prey animal, which is the horse or the animal of burden or whatever.
Marvelous. No, this is too marvelous. Yes, of course it is. And of course it's very context specific as well. So I just also wanted to say, because something you said really sparked a thought to me, and I know this interests you as well, and that is, since we are talking about settler colonialism, there is also a danger, and talking about the imperial gaze, there's this massive danger if we center animals at the core of our endeavor and what we're interested in. There's a big danger in kind of repeating the imperial gaze again, and again marginalizing human beings who have been already rendered liminal and on the margins of history, really, the, you know, Europe and the people without history, you know, because the imperial gaze has done this before. So just you and I both, we, you know, this is stuff we care about and talk about a lot, that we know that we've got to be real careful if we are talking about this kind of stuff to make sure that when we put animals at the center, it is not at the expense of Indigenous people who've already been rendered, you know, not at the center. And that really we talk about power. And if we do that, if we talk about power in a multi-species assemblage, I think we'll be fine with our gaze and how we frame things. I think that's really kind of the honest way to do this history. But yeah, I think these things are context specific. I'll circle back to that if you want me to, but I think this is something that calls out for a comparative book where we set these animals kind of, and let's be guided by the animals in this book. Lindsay, you and I can write it. We'll edit it, all the people in this group, where we let the animals dictate, not the geopolitical region, and we compare and contrast just how differently animals that are ecologically very, very similar, but because of a human socioeconomic framework kind of imposed on them, they're seen very differently and they are treated very differently, and even their iconography is different over time. So yeah, just a point to start exploring. Thanks, Lindsay. It's lovely to see you.
So we only have a couple minutes left. So what we're going to do is I'm going to close out, but if anyone wants to stay on for an extra 5 minutes, if Gary has time to hang out, we'll ask one last question.
Cool.
But before we do that, I would like to tell everyone that ASI is having a 40th anniversary webinar on June 20th. With featured speakers Erica Fudge and Zane McNeil. There's a link up in the chat. And when I will send a video recording of this webinar out to everyone who registered, whether you were able to attend or not. And that will eventually go up on ASI's webpage for colloquiums as well, so that you can share this webinar with others. When I send that email out, I'll also send you information about ASI's 40th anniversary webinar as well, so you can attend that. I would like to thank Sandra for being here today. I know a lot of you have to leave right at the hour. So those of you who have to go, you may go with our blessing, not that you needed it. And then we will just take one more audience question and hang out for another 5 minutes.
William, thanks very much, Carol. Thanks so much. Yes.
So Gary, it's all you.
Oh, Gary, you're on mute.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Sandra. I'll be quick, but it's a sort of big question. You set out wonderfully this notion of coexistence of these groups of people. But I mean, thinking about your notions of colonialism, I have a sense that we've got a new colonialism going on, driven from rich northern countries and their NGOs, which are now forcing Indigenous people into dangerous relationships with these animals, basically for the benefit of, I think it was Tobias saying, what about safaris? So I take students every year to South Africa, they enjoy seeing lions, but they don't own the cattle, which are being preyed on by the lions. The lions are protected, but the local community have no recourse. So it's great for my students to see them for 2 days, but you know, the local Zulu communities along the edge of the Pongola Reserve where I work, they're preyed on. And that's all paid for by a Dutch NGO.
Well, I'm glad that it is, in that particular case, paid for by a Dutch NGO. That's rare and great. But in fact, I think you're absolutely right. And here it's so difficult because, and a lot of is happening in the very, you know, if this is a more than human world, a lot of it's happening in the less than human world of Twitter, where people are alienated from each other and things are really polarized. But there are a lot of influencers on Twitter who don't actually know the reality in Africa. And that's why I, Gary, included that part about don't make this a Disney Lion King view of what it is like to live close to dangerous apex predators and to really seek accommodation with them. And not just lions, elephants as well. You know, when people call them gentle giants, it is to weep, because if you live with them, its food security is harmed, your actual life is in danger very often, certainly your crops for the elephants and your livestock for the lions. So when you make this Disney version, as you see on Twitter, with people saying Botswana has got it wrong, South Africa's got it wrong, we should be making wildlife policy from the metropole. It does feel exactly like another neo-colonial or neo-imperial vision that's being imposed on Africa again. No, you should listen to what people are saying in those countries and then work with them to make conservation policy. So at the moment, the big furore, particularly in the UK, is about the trophy hunting bill. And a lot of Twitter influencers have a very reductionist, simplistic view. Of course, we should ban trophy hunting. Only a madman would do it. It's disgusting. We stop it immediately. This will mean two things. One, that local people are going to suffer. In the immediate next couple of years, they are going to be in real trouble, people who make their living off this industry. And secondly, we will see a vast depletion in wildlife numbers. And it's all very well to say we should immediately pivot to total safari or photographic hunting. First of all, that's got its own downside as well. But secondly, it doesn't come anywhere near paying for what we need to pay for. And it isn't poaching that does away with wildlife in Africa. It is, in fact, perfectly reasonable to explain people needing it for their livestock and for their crops, people needing land. So I agree with you so strongly, Gary. And it's up to us to tell the stories more clearly, more persuasively, to explain why it is that it is not just a simple Manichaean battle between good and evil, trophy hunting bad, banning trophy hunting good. It's much more complicated than that. Obviously, we want to move to a long-term solution. We have to think of ways, but we're not there yet. We have to one day move away from that, but not now. And neither can there be an imperial discourse from the world of Twitter and the metropole and Europe and North America saying to local people and wagging the finger, hunting is wrong. Because that reminds me of what Lindsay was asking about, you know, that imperial gaze imposed yet again upon local people. Really, you know, I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you. And incidentally, because we got an election, Botswana's going to be very happy that the trophy hunting bill importation has been cancelled.
I know. I saw, Gary, I follow it very closely. It's really important. Yeah. Thank you so much. So nice to see you.
Sandra, thank you so much for taking time to hang out a little longer so we could get one more question. I put Sandra's email up in the chat, so if anybody didn't get their question answered, I know not everybody did, and you want to email Sandra, I assume you're okay with that, Sandra, because you had your email up
I would love to. Follow me on Twitter. Keep the conversation going. My students say I'm wildly bad at Twitter. I don't think I really understand it, but follow me on it. Or I've also moved to this wonderful new place, Blue Sky, because Elon Musk hasn't heard about it. So I've gone there as well. It's marvelous.
All right, so hopefully if you didn't get your question answered, you can reach out to Sandra and get it answered that way. Thank you so much for this lovely talk.
It's lovely.
With you, if you signed up, when you registered, you had a chance to click a button to sign up to get emails. So if you're not already getting emails about these events and you didn't choose to join our mailing list, I think Lisa already put the link up in the chat, but you can always reach out to me or to Gayla or any of us, and we'll get you on that email list to let you know when these are coming up. We're going to take a break for a few months and we will come back in September with another talk. So thank you so much to Sandra for helping us go out with a fabulous talk for this academic year. And for those of you who are academics and get the summer off, I put that in air quotes if you didn't. I hope you actually take a little bit of time off. All right. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sandra, and thank you all.
Thank you. This was lovely.